Today, we're heading to the grassy hills of southeastern Australia, where kangaroos graze under the gum trees and wombats bumble along at night. On the outskirts of Canberra, there's a place called Wandiyali Environa Wildlife Sanctuary. It covers around 300 hectares near Queanbeyan. Late last year, Australian Wildlife Conservancy entered an agreement with the owners to help look after this property, and it became AWC's newest partnership project. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce one of the owners of Wandiyali, Carolyn Larcombe, who, alongside her brothers and her family, established the sanctuary and has been working to look after this place her whole life. Hi, Kaz.
Hi, Joey. Thanks very much for having me. Welcome, everyone.
You're speaking to us from Wandiyali today. Can you paint a picture for us of what you see when you look out the window?
So we're here, as Joey said, just south of Canberra. We're about 30 minutes from Parliament House. We live in the rolling hills of the southern tablelands. And when I look out the window today, it is gorgeous Canberra autumn weather, quite warm and quite dry, but still and beautiful. And at this time of year, we have flocks of honeyeaters, mostly yellow-faced honeyeaters, that are migrating down from the mountains, and they migrate through here in quite large flocks, heading to the coast, and then they migrate up the coast. So that's an altitudinal migration of honeyeaters. So you go outside and you can hear and see these gorgeous flocks of birds flying overhead.
Beautiful. And quite close to Canberra. Like, you can actually see Parliament House from where you are. I think, more to the point, parliamentarians can see Wandiyali from where they are. So, hopefully that's a bit of inspiration for some of those decision makers. And it's interesting location in terms of its connections to the region too. So it's got that altitudinal, it's sort of a connection between the high country and the coast, and then those north-south connections with things like the honeyeaters as well. What's the bush like? What's the vegetation like on Wandiyali?
Well, we're really lucky here. We have a mix of vegetation, but our prime focus is box gum grassy woodland, which is a critically endangered ecosystem, mainly due to widespread clearing for grazing all over southeastern Australia. So we have some beautiful box gum grassy woodland. We also have patches. We have some riparian habitat along like a 2-kilometre stretch of Jerrabomba Creek, which is what you're seeing now, which flows into Lake Burley Griffin. And we also have some patches of scribbler gum dry forest or scribbler gum woodland. And we have some broadleaf peppermint forest as well, with some quite steep, valleys. So there's a whole mosaic of different environments here.
Pretty diverse, and it's 300 hectares, so a significant patch. You mentioned that box gum grassy woodland, which is a critically endangered vegetation community in New South Wales, which would have been very widespread, but it's basically been cleared for farming across most of that range, New South Wales, even all the way up into Queensland. So patches like this are very important for a bunch of threatened species. What some of the animals and birds that you get there that live in that box gum grassy woodland?
Well, we have here we've got some, obviously there's the threatened ecosystem in itself, or the endangered ecosystem. Within that, we have things like purunga grasshoppers, which are a little grasshopper restricted largely to the grasslands of ACT, but we have them here as we're just adjoining ACT, and pink-tailed worm lizards throughout the property here. Not so many on the animal side. Obviously, eastern grey kangaroos and bare-nosed wombats are common, but we're very lucky to have here a whole suite of New South Wales threatened woodland birds. So things like dusky wood swallows are really prominent at the moment. Scarlet robins have arrived a little bit earlier than usual. They're another thing that come down out of the mountains and spend winter here. Scarlet robins and flame robins. So scarlet robins, when you walk outside at the moment, you can just hear them all over the property. Speckled warblers and varied sitellas. So there's a whole suite of very cute woodland birds that move around inside the sanctuary here.
Yeah, some really special ones in that mix. That's great. Yeah, and dusky wood swallows, one of those ones that's declined. That's kind of woodland suite of birds has suffered so badly from habitat loss. It's great that they can cling on in places like Wandiyali where habitat is intact and being looked after really well, and we'll come to that. But I'm very interested to hear about your family connection to this place, which goes back 100 years. Tell us a little bit about your grandfather and how did he come to purchase this land near Queanbeyan?
So my grandfather, Henry Halloran, was a surveyor by trade, and in the 1920s, he was looking to purchase land over quite a wide area of New South Wales. And this was one area that attracted him because the ACT had only just been gazetted, and all of the land in the ACT is leasehold. So most of it's under 99-year leases, but the land in New South Wales is freehold land. So he was looking at land close to the newly announced Australian capital, but freehold land. So and there was a local hill station, a local property that was being subdivided. The new boundary between ACT and New South Wales went straight through the middle of that property. And he bought land on the New South Wales side of that property. His plan was to subdivide it, but that he got a fair way with that, and then a number of circumstances meant that subdivision never went ahead. We came here as a family in the 1960s and had fine wool merino. My brother now runs grass-fed Angus beef on the western area of the property, and this eastern section has been set aside for conservation.
That's an astounding connection to the place. So it must feel really, really familiar to you. And the fact that you're living there now, it's your home. So how great to look after it with these conservation initiatives. What are the changes that you've seen? Obviously the land use has changed in some parts, but since your childhood more broadly, have you seen changes in the landscape?
There are more houses around, so there's a lot of development happening everywhere, but we certainly see that on adjacent areas to the property. Where we are here, where cattle have been excluded for 20 years, there's a real difference in the tree regeneration. So things like wattles in particular and cherry ballarts, exocarpus seem to be the two standouts that are really coming back without the cattle. When I grew up around here, there were no wombats, and now we have a reasonable, healthy, I'd have to say, population of bare-nosed wombats. That's a real standout. Yeah.
And what about on the side of feral animals? Things like foxes and cats. Were they something you were aware of when you were growing up?
Not really cats. I didn't know much about the cat story until I learnt more through AWC. Even foxes, they really didn't impinge on us a lot. Whether there were less, it was much, it was all farming country. I think the wombat population was kept down by surrounding farmers, and ditto with the fox population. So that was never something that we really thought about. But certainly now that we have really just one farmer/grazier here who's doing any kind of feral animal management, otherwise we have rural and semi-rural areas or peri-urban areas with no fox management whatsoever, and there are a lot of foxes around.
Yeah, and we know obviously that that's bad for small native mammals. There's large areas where they're missing, and again we'll touch on that in a second. But for all sorts of animals, foxes are very destructive in Australian ecosystems. So yes, so that's a threat that I suppose is one of the things you're having to face there. What can you tell us about your decision to convert this parcel of properties into a wildlife sanctuary? What was the inspiration that struck to sort of lay out that vision? And what is your vision for Wandiyali?
So many factors come into play when you're thinking about looking after land in the long term. One of the things here was the recognition that it was actually box gum grassy woodland. That played a big part. I've always been interested in our Australian mammals, and understanding the story and the trajectory of our Australian mammals over the last sort of 30 years has really played a part. And I guess ended up in this opportunity that we had as a family to set aside this land for conservation and for biodiversity restoration. And I guess the natural sort of endpoint of that is to restore the mammals here, to complete or to move towards completing the biodiversity that would have been here previously.
Yeah, and that there's a whole sort of challenge getting the information about that landscape through time. I guess you've got a bit of a head start with that long connection to the place and your personal experience, but going further back, it's sort of reconstructing what the ecosystem might have looked like and then trying to restore it. So I know that for many years you have been working to restore the habitat and vegetation. And part of that involved the actual structure of what's on the ground. Tell us about some of that work.
Yeah, so I guess one of the mixed blessings of having development nearby is that there's a lot of land clearing that happens. And there were two local projects, and we were lucky to receive, I think, 50 semi-loads of coarse woody debris. And coarse woody debris in this context is just trees that have been knocked over for development. So some enormous trees, and you look at them and you go, what is going on that these trees are being knocked over? But we have given them a second life here. So we've got two big sections, which were two sections that were identified as somewhere where a semi could go. A lot of the property is not accessible for any type of vehicle, let alone a semi-trailer. And it's been fantastic. So we've got these two big areas of coarse woody debris. We planted through them. So we did restoration plantings of wattle and two different eucalypts of the box gum, which is yellow box and black lights red gum. And it provides this incredible habitat for the birds. So these transition zones to allow these little birds to move through the landscape. My understanding from research that they've done at Mulligan's Flat is that it's an incredible habitat for insects. I think the research that they did there was looking at beetles, and the beetles, the number and the number and the variety of species just increased 10 or more fold with the addition of this structure to the landscape. So that's been great. It's been exciting. Have things grow through there and see the birds using it. So that's been fantastic, yeah.
A big job. And it's sort of, we quite often think about revegetation, but actually putting back in that complexity that a lot of wildlife needs to give things a bit of a head start. Because, those trees would take hundreds of years to get this sort of big hollow log, size. It's really impressive to see. What about weeds? Is there much of an issue with weeds?
Weeds are our biggest issue. Now that we feel that we've excluded cats and all but one fox, Mr. Limpy, weeds are really a challenge. We've had those, not so much this year, but the previous sort of 4 years were very wet, and things just changed quite radically over that period of time. So we sort of, we feel that there's a list of species and we've got to just work on one. And so the most invasive, we try and deal with them first. Canberra and the southern tablelands is awash with African lovegrass. So that's been our priority for the last 2 years, is is checking and trying to keep that under control. It's nasty. So there's been a big focus on that. There's serrated tussock as well, which is a bit easier to identify, so much easier to control. We've done some very intensive weed control along our section of Jerrabomba Creek, which includes getting rid of the willows, the crack willows that were along the creek, and replanting riparian vegetation. Blackberries have been a big factor, again, following up from the wet weather. So that in the last sort of 6 months, we've had a big blackberry program. yeah, and the rest.
Yeah, a lot of hard work dealing with weeds on a property like that. I guess on the flip side, there's the native grasses and native sort of ground cover plants. And we know, over the last few decades, we've had this increasing appreciation of the role that fire has played in maintaining grassland ecosystems. As people will know, AWC does a lot of planned burning, aerial, prescribed burning in Northern Australia, in mostly savanna ecosystems where we get that reset of the wet season every year and lots of grass growth. But in Southern Australia, things are on a different time scale. It might be, multiple years or decades in between when areas would have been burned by First Nations people. Do we have an understanding of the sort of fire regime that might have been in place around Wandiyali? Or is there work to sort of reconstitute an appropriate fire regime?
I think that every year there's more and more people in the region who are looking at doing, I guess, what we call cool patch burns. So burning in the cool season over autumn and winter, not over the hotter months of the year. Burning small patches at a time. It's partly, and that's what we've been putting into place. It's an interesting, and we're keen to do more. We're keen to develop a bit more of a logical approach to that now that we have a little bit of an idea of technique. But it's also in these areas, it's a matter of talking to the RFS, the Rural Fire Service, because they really require themselves to be involved in these kinds of burns, and that's a work in progress as well.
And you're next door to suburbs as well, so it's a very different
Absolutely.
space. Yeah.
Absolutely. There's all those factors that come into play. But we're certainly, the burns that we've done just in-house kind of thing over the last few years have just taught us about techniques, really, and timing. And we know that but only small patches, like 20-metre diameter patches. But we know also that the critical thing is not to say we're going to do a burn next Thursday and then do it next Thursday, because next Thursday may not be suitable. It may be too windy or not windy enough, or the humidity. So it's very much a factor of trying to work out where you're thinking of burning, and then when the conditions seem appropriate, going and doing it. So it's a bit of a day-to-day basis. And then if you're trying to involve RFS, gets a bit complicating, or it's complicated.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. Very complex work. And it's exciting to think that those fire patterns might be returning to some of these landscapes where, really since colonization, we've suppressed fire has been the overarching approach. You've also done some work installing nest boxes for some of the threatened species. Have you observed them being used, and what sort of number of nest boxes have gone in?
We've probably put in about 20 nest boxes. We had an idea, that was a very steep learning curve. We had an idea that we would like to provide nest boxes for superb parrots, which we don't see here yet, but it seems that the climate generated trend is that they're moving in this direction. So we made these amazing nest boxes for superb parrots. But building nest boxes is not something that you can say, well, I've built a nest box for a superb parrot or a gang,
And they arrive. Yeah, yeah.
and they arrive.
Yeah.
So all of our superb nest boxes have brush-tailed possums in them.
Okay.
We're not doing any more nest boxes at the moment. It's very hard, as I've just said, very hard to target the species that you want and exclude other species that maybe you don't necessarily need. We've had actually more success with nest boxes, like microbat nest boxes or microbat roost boxes, which are very much more specific for microbats, and they're more rewarding.
Yeah, great. We had someone ask when they registered about the sort of legal protection that's in place for a property like Wandiyali. What level of protection does it have?
So we have the sanctuary is made up of 3 different lots or 3 different blocks. and each one of them has a conservation covenant, which is a covenant that's registered on title, and it's the highest level of protection that private landowners can give their land in New South Wales. So we're happy with that. It's not an absolute, you know. There's always a caveat at the end that it can be, if the minister so desires, it can be changed. But we think that, and all of those have been put on the land, put on the blocks here through the Biodiversity Conservation Trust, the New South Wales BCT. So they're the organisation, New South Wales government organisation, that runs ways of putting covenants on blocks.
So it sounds like there's been lots of work put into to get this property back to sort of the level of ecological health that is possible, to a point where, you know, everything except the things that have gone locally extinct are doing pretty well. You know, we hope that they're improving thanks to all this management. You've also visited various AWC sanctuaries, which include fenced safe havens, so our big feral predator-free fenced areas. Did that inspire the next step for Wandiyali?
Totally inspirational. We visited Scotia in Western New South Wales, I think 3 or 4 times, and walking into Scotia, seeing all the diggings, all the little the bettongs that do the diggings, and this sort of ecosystem, you know, management that they do, really, and especially at Scotia, seeing numbats. So they're a very, very cute Australian mammal that is notably out during the day. We've visited at New Haven in the Tanami Desert, and seeing bilbies there, amazing. You know, it's incredible to see how much influence they have on I don't know, it's like landscape gardening, really, on a very, very broad scale.
Mm. And so at Wandiyali now, over the past few years, you've actually constructed a safe haven around about 300 hectares. Can you tell us about what that project was like and what you're up to?
So the project itself, it's one of those projects that starts off as, you know, like, that sounds like a good idea, and how do we make that happen? And then, well, we set up a not-for-profit trust, which enabled us to attract some federal funding. So the fence is partly federal funded and partly privately funded. So, and was built in probably in three sections time-wise, as funding became available. So where the fence is complete, I mentioned before, we still seem to have one wily fox. We've had some long-standing wombat negotiations, so that's been interesting. The wombats have actually been the biggest factor in keeping our fence intact. So we now have, I think, 40 wombat gates around the perimeter of the sanctuary, and they're heavy gates that allow wombats through, and echidnas, as it turns out, but are too heavy and are not like a behavioural thing that foxes go through. So that's been fantastic. So we're up at the stage now of having an intact safe haven with lots of restoration work in the past. And now we're at the stage of looking to do small mammal translocations.
And that's when you turn to AWC to invite us to get involved. Of course, we've got lots of experience with these kinds of projects. So what is the plan from here, and how does AWC help with the next chapter for Wandiyali?
It was absolutely the best thing ever to have AWC involved. It's a huge step to go from where we are now to actually doing translocations. There's the most incredible amount of paperwork involved. And AWC is helping with all that paperwork. But right now, what we're doing, the AWC ecologists are looking at every aspect of what we have here. So looking at the habitats that we have here, looking at the size, looking at the mosaic of habitats, looking at species that might have been here previously, looking at species that climate change might allow to be here, and putting all of those sort of factors into the project and coming out the other end with a potential species list, which I haven't seen yet. That's all happening absolutely as we speak. But species, we think that here previously there would have been, like you've mentioned, these critical weight range mammals and ground nesting birds. And they're two of the target groups of animals that are largely foxes and cats have a very negative effect on. So here previously there would have been bettongs, maybe 2 species of bettongs, bandicoots, antechinus, quolls, eastern quolls probably would have been here, spot-tailed quolls. We think, well, eastern quolls are extinct on the mainland outside safe havens, but spot-tailed quolls are still around, not here, but in the region. But things also historically, which we're not looking at birds right at the moment, or not initially, but things historically were Australian bustards. We're here on the grassland plains of Canberra. Plains wanderers have been seen here historically as well. So there's this incredible variety of mammals and birds in particular that were here previously that we don't see here anymore.
The potential with a predator-free safe haven is to restore some of those species, as many as we can, back to the site. And I just can't wait to go back in 5 years, 10 years, and hopefully see some of those species which are currently locally extinct returning to the hills around Canberra. What are you looking forward to most over the next decade or so?
Oh, look, we walk around here every day, and I would hope that I will be able to do that over the next decade and see different critters here, things that we've not seen here before.
Kaz, thank you so much for joining us today and telling us about this really special place, Wandiyali. It's a privilege for us to be involved in this project.
Thank you, Joey. We're very happy to be in a partnership with AWC.
You can read more about AWC's work at Wandiyali in our next Wildlife Matters magazine, which has just gone to print, so it should be with you fairly soon. And Kaz has actually written a beautiful piece for this next edition. It's also able to be viewed at our website after it launches, and that's australianwildlife.org. So finally, thanks to all of you who joined today for being people who care about wildlife. If you've recently made a donation to AWC, thank you, because none of what we do is possible without you. And if you've been inspired by this conversation and the work that AWC is doing alongside our partners, please consider making a donation. You can also give a donation as a gift on behalf of someone else. So give us a call, send an email, or go to australianwildlife.org, and together we can help Australia's wildlife thrive.